And today, like I said, we're going to be working with what's called benchmark fractions and percents for some given figure, okay? So essentially what we're going to be given is a number line, all right? It's going to be broken up into equal parts, so they each have the same interval, right? Just like any number line that we've seen before. And what we're going to have to do is go through and fill in missing either fractions or percents based off of the parts that everything's broken into, okay? So we'll go through here and do a couple examples, and I'll show you some different ways that you can go about solving these types of questions. There are multiple avenues that we can go down in order to find all of our missing percentages and things like that. And you'll start to pick up on some trends and patterns based off of the parts they're broken into. Remember back on Friday, we talked about ways to get from a denominator of 4, 5, or 10 to get to 100, right? Because all of our percents are out of 100. We're going to see how that kind of plays into what we're talking about today as well when we go to fill in our missing fractions and our percents, okay? So the first example we have here, a number line is broken into 4 equal parts. What are the missing fractions or percentages, all right? So do you have an answer? Do you have a question? Oh, yeah, my apologies. Sorry. There's a couple, like I said, there's a couple ways that we can go about this. First, we can find what each individual segment is going to be, all right? So notice that my number line, it goes from 0 to 1 in my fractions, as it always will, and it'll go from 0% to 100% in percentages, all right? Well, if it's broken into 4 equal parts, what I can do is take my 100% or take my 1 and divide it by 4. What this tells me then is that when I look at my percentages, each individual segment is going to be 25%, right? And I can't simplify that fraction any further. That means that each fraction above each individual segment is going to be 1/4. Okay? And hopefully we can use this fact to help us find what the percentages are going to be at each step along the way for something that's missing, what each fraction is going to be each step along the way, and be able to fill in our missing values, okay? So if I start at 0% and each individual interval is 1/4 or 25%, that means that this percentage point right here would be 25%. Does that make sense? We follow along with that? 25% and 1/4 are equivalent, right? So that's the equivalent fraction for that percent. I go to my second missing value. They want me to find the fraction at 50%. Well, what would the fraction be at 50% if I'm moving up 1/4 each time? What would be that next fraction? What's that? Not 1/5. 1/5 would be 20%, so that would be going the opposite direction. 2/4. If I'm going up 1/4 each time, notice I have 1/4 plus 1/4. Well, that would be 2/4. So I could write 2/4 here. Well, how does that simplify as a fraction? 1/2, right? Or 1/2. We talked about this a little bit on Friday, a little bit last week. Something's cut into 4 parts. Easiest way that you can think about this type of example, if you relate it to something that is a little bit easier to kind of work with, think about quarters, right? If you have 1/4, you have 25 cents, and you have 1/4 of a dollar. If you have 2 quarters, you have 50 cents, or you have half of a dollar. If you have 3 quarters, how many cents do you have? 75. So I'm at 75% of the way to my 100% or a dollar, right? You can kind of start to break things up and think about them in more realistic terms than what you might have seen before. Okay, so that's one way to go about this type of problem, is to think about the intervals that you can break it up into. Another thing that you can do is, if you have a missing percent or missing fraction, you can work with what we've done before, converting from a percent to a decimal or something like that, or from a fraction to a percent. Notice that I have 25 or 1/4 here. Well, how do I get from 4 to 100? What do I have to multiply that by to get from, look, good, 25. So now I have a fraction with 100 in my denominator, 25 above. Well, that's 25%, right? Remember we converted from a fraction to a percent. So I can fill in my value there. For this one here, when we were finding the missing fraction, you could have done 50 over 100. Well, that simplifies to 5 over 10, which is just 1/2. So that would be your fraction there, right? 3/4, very similar. How do I get from 4 to 100? Multiply by 25 on top and bottom. Well, that gives me the 75 over 100, which I know is 75%. So you see how everything that we've talked about from before is starting to kind of apply itself and connect to ideas that we're discussing now, where we have some fractions or missing percentages. We're able to fill those in with some of the past information we've learned. Okay. Any questions about the first example? You might see a question similar on your ALEKS assignment. It's going to be cut into 4 equal parts. You could also see something broken into maybe more intervals. So now our number line is broken into 10 equal parts. What are the missing fractions and percentages? Now, I might not ask you for every single missing value like we saw in the 4th one, or when it was cut into 4s, excuse me, which may be even a little bit more difficult if they don't give you as much information to work with. So we could do the same thing that we did before. If I have 100% of something, it's cut into 10 equal parts. What's that? 10%. Right, good. So I have 100, pretty much divide that by 10 for my equal parts. I know that each step along the way is going to be 10%. So from this piece to this piece, 10%, an additional 10%, 10%, 10%. I'll also take 1, right, my fraction, divide that by 10. So for each fraction along the way, it's 1/10, 2/10, 3/10, so on and so forth. And you can find each interval with fractions that way. Well, let's go to our first missing piece here. It's in the percentages part, right? They give me 1/10 as a fraction. What would that be as a percent? 10%, right? And we talked about that too with each interval is 10%. So that would have been an easy first one to kind of fill in. Another thing that we could have done, as we saw above, is taken the 1/10 and said, well, what's that as a percent? Well, how do I get from 10 to 100? Well, I have to multiply that by 10. So whatever I do on the bottom, I'll do on the top. That's 10 over 100, or the 10% that I found. Any questions about just finding that first missing piece there? Let's go to our second one. So I go 10%. This would be 20% and 2/10, 30%, 3/10. I have 2 missing values here. What are each of those missing values going to be? What comes after 30% if I'm counting by tens? 40%. Nice job. Good. So then I have to ask myself, well, the other missing values right above that, what's 40% as a fraction? 40 over 100, or 4 over 10, right? We know that method of simplifying fractions. If you have zeros over top of each other, you can cross them out. Have we seen that before? To simplify things. So it'd be 4 over 10. Next comes 5 over 10. What would come after that? 6 over 10, or what percentage? 60. What comes after the 60% if I'm counting by tens? 70%. 80%. What would this be as a fraction? What's 9? 9 over 10, right, for 90%. So however you decide to find it, whether you start converting things with common denominators, you make it equal to 100 and work that way, whether you just find the initial interval for percentages or for fractions and find it that way, that works as well. Whatever's easiest for you to make sure that you fill out all of the missing terms there is fine. But just make sure that you have a strategy to use. You saw both ways and how they kind of both connect. especially the things that we've done before. Okay. Any questions about either of these examples or anything that we covered today?
Add something in.
Yeah, sure.
If you guys, I don't know if you've noticed too, another way to connect this to for real life. I know the first one was in stores and you think of money. When I see this second one here, I think of you guys, your classwork. So, for example, if I were to give a quiz, the easiest thing for me to do is to give a quiz with 10 questions. So if you notice here, the last one is broken into 10, and it'll be easier for me to grade, and I'll be able to get your grade back to you faster if I gave you a quiz with 10 questions, because I know right away, if you get 5 right, you automatically get a 50. All right, so if you guys ever start to connect the types of quizzes that you guys get from the teachers, you might notice they might be giving more 10 questions or maybe even 20, something along the lines of multiple to 10. It's a little easier to calculate quicker than to do it when it's broken down into 10 here. So just to kind of help you guys out with connecting it to, you're gonna use it, and you can actually start using it now whenever you guys are getting quizzes and you want to try to figure out your own grade. That's this is how you would do it here.
Really good point. Nice. Any questions about anything that we covered or anything at all related to this topic? Okay.